Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Booker Prize-winning author John Banville's new novel, Singularities, is a multi-layered novel of nostalgia, life, and death, and quantum theory, which opens with the return of one of his most celebrated characters as he is released from prison. A man with a borrowed name steps onto the estate of his youth, but all is not as it seems. There is a new family living in the drafty old house, the Godleys, descendants of the late world-famous scientist Adam Godley, whose theory of existence threw the universe into chaos. And this mystery man, who has just completed a prison sentence, feels as if time has stopped, or was torn, or was opened in new and strange ways. John Banville is the author of 17 novels. He has been a recipient of the Man Booker Prize, the Guardian Fiction Award, and the Franz Kafka Prize. The new novel is Singularities. He is one of my favorite authors. I have been waiting for a very long time to have him on this program, and it's an absolute delight to welcome him to the Book Show. Thank you very much for being with us.
I'm very glad to be here, and that was a wonderful précis of the novel. I couldn't have done it. So congratulations.
It is a hard novel to briefly describe, and I guess with that, for you, what was the original goal of just saying, this is what I want to write about?
Well, I think that I recognized fairly early on, and I was writing the book for about 5-6 years to write. I think I recognized early on that it was going to be the last book of its kind that I would write. I'm now past my mid-70s. I don't think I can contemplate embarking on another 6-year-long novel of this kind. So I wanted to revisit my own work, to give acknowledgments to the writers and artists whom I have admired over the years, my great predecessors, far greater than I. So it's a book of retrospection and a book, I hope, of looking forward as well. And I also hope it's a book full of delights. I mean, that's what any artist sets out to do, is to delight his readership, or her listeners, or their viewers. Delight is the first premise of art, I think.
It is such a playful novel. Was that set in your mind, or did that come organically as you were working through as to who would appear and when and how?
Oh, goodness, you're asking me to explain the process, and I'm afraid I can't do that. I don't think anybody can. You know, when I started writing, I always felt that because I was young, full of certainties, I presumed that I was in absolute control and that everything that happened was done by me. But the older I got and the older I get, the more I realized that writing fiction, making art, is a form of controlled dreaming. It's also a form of transcendent play, but it seems to me now kind of dreaming. At least twice a week I look up from my desk and I say, what am I doing here? I'm supposed to be an adult. Why am I telling these gilded lies? And why am I expending so much effort on it? My God. The answer is like Luther's, I can do no other. But I do feel, I suppose, that it's worthwhile. Certainly, the great works of art that I have known in my lifetime, I can't imagine a world without them. So the making of art is still a serious business. I hope not a solemn business. Solemnity is the death of art.
This book seems like it would be, you mentioned how long it took you, but it seems like it would be so difficult to write. I say this because the sentences are so beautiful and, dare I say, in many cases, just perfect. They're gorgeous and they're interconnected and they bring us to such fascinating places, and they're playful. Is that a playful art of getting that right, of getting those words? Because that seems like it would be quite arduous.
Well, I'm very pleased you think that the sentences are perfect, but of course I don't think so.
No.
To me, they're all flawed. I mean, the nature of art is failure. glorious failure in some cases. And that's what one aims for. You can't have perfection. I do see it as the artist's duty, especially in these days, the literary artist's duty, to keep a language pure and to keep it rich. Parents love shoddy language. They love imprecise language. They love weasel words that seem to be the truth while they're telling you lies. And one of our tasks is to, as I say, to protect the language, to be guardians of language. Now, I don't say that I sit down at my desk in the morning and say, oh, here's a guardian of language going to exercise his duty. This is all retrospective. This is after the fact. When I'm writing the damn thing, I just want to get the damn thing finished and out of the way so I can do something else. But I do think that I've always felt that craft comes before art, and that one cannot claim to be an artist without having learned one's craft. And I've been practicing sentences since I was 12 or 13 years old when I started writing, and I'm still practicing. There's a lovely anecdote of Henry James that I always tell, that when he was dying, he was in a coma on his deathbed. He was gone to all intents and purposes, but his hand was still moving over the sheet. He was still writing. I like to think that I'll be the same, what I'll be writing is a perfect sentence, which no one will read, and I will take with me into the land of the dead.
There are several narrators and singularities. It seems like you don't always want us to know who that particular narrator is at that moment.
Yeah, I like a bit of confusion. I think it keeps the reader alert, to be wrong-footed every now and then, and the reader thinks, oh, this is this character, and then just goes and goes the other character. Again, it's a kind of play. I've always been fascinated by the relation not between the novelist and the reader, but between the novel and the reader. The reader wants, first of all, to be told a story. All readers are children at bedtime, no matter how sophisticated they are, no matter how complex or abstruse the book is that they're reading. We all want to be told a story. Most novelists are impatient at this because, we hate being storytellers, but we have to tell a story because the only material we have is the human comedy, the human tragedy, what people do. But I like to think that I'm interested not so much in what people do, it's what people are. I like to try to strike past the everyday doings of human beings to get at some essence. Now, again, I'm doomed to failure, but the effort is worth making, I think.
The new novel is The Singularities. It is published by Knopf. John Banville is our guest on this week's book show. Let us talk about that idea of failure. Has that always been the case for you? How do you get over that? At a point, if you keep failing, of what keeps you from going on? Is it because you're always searching for the perfect sentence?
Oh, yes. My wife used to say to me when I was in despair and I said, I'm giving this up. And she would say to me, oh, yes, what will you do then? Go into politics and destroy the world. The ego of the artist is a very dangerous thing when it's unhinged from the desk, from the work. I don't know. I think that I write for myself, of course. All writers do, whether they protest otherwise or not. One writes for oneself first, and then there's a great pleasant surprise that a few other people are also interested in what one is writing about. It's a great pleasure. But inevitably, there is failure. There's a wonderful cartoon by that great, I don't know if he's American or Canadian, cartoonist Gary Larson. I think he's American.
Yes.
And it's in two parts. And the top panel is a flower bed with very beautiful flowers. They're all, just perfect, unfolded there in the sun. And it's how people see flowers. The lower panel, they all have crossed eyes and snaggled teeth and cauliflower ears, which is how flowers see themselves. And that's the case with my work. I only see the flaws. I only see the crossed eyes and snaggled teeth and cauliflower ears. But that's as it should be. If I was satisfied with what I did, I would stop. You know, as my wife said, then what would I do? I mean, since I finished Singularities, I've been somewhat at a loss. I mean, I have other work to do. I'm writing another crime novel, and I have some screen work to do and so on. But my days are frighteningly barren. I mean, I wake in the morning and I think, what am I going to do today? And I said, well, I'll do another bit of that crime book, or another bit of that script. But there's a voice behind that saying, but what will you really do? And it's quite interesting. It's scary. It's quite interesting. It seems to be a new phase of my life. And at my age, to interrupt a new phase of life is a great bonus.
I am sorry to hear about the passing of your wife. The book is in memory of her. You lost her last year. Has grief changed the process at all of writing, of that moment of what your day is like?
Oh, well, for the first 6 months or so, I just couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything at all. I don't know how I filled in those days and weeks and months. Bereavement is very strange. Anyone who's gone through it, I'm sure, will know what I mean when I say it's not at all what you expect. I thought it would be great, mountainous heaves of grief, and then, sort of glimpses of the sunny uplands. Sweet. In fact, it's like an unending hangover. It's just awful.
Yeah.
It's boring. And it feels like there's a lot of resentment. I find myself wandering around the house, a bloody woman. I had to go and die. And I realized that in a book of mine from back in 2004 or something, The Sea, which is the narrator is a man whose wife has died. And when I finished it, I thought, oh my God, I've exaggerated all this. It can't be that bad. But I find now, almost a year after my wife died, I find, no, I got it right. In the sea, that's just what mourning is like. It's a very strange state. Because, as my wife used to say, death is the ultimate disappearing trick. And it is very strange to think that she's not anywhere. I keep thinking, the door will open and she says, surprise, I'm back. And of course, I'd like nothing better, but I know it's not going to happen. One lives in one's memory, and I have such delightful memories of her. She was the funniest human being and the best company I could have had. I was lucky. We were married for gazillions of years. We lost track of how long we were married for. We always had fun. On the night before she died, we were laughing together. She knew she was dying, but she was a great example in bravery. So I'm very grateful to her. And she was my reader, especially in the early days. I used to give a manuscript in progress, and she'd read it and say, "That's very good." I'd say, "Oh, is it that bad?" And she'd say, "Yes, go back and start again." People said to me, "Well, how would you know when she approved?" And I said, "Well, I never did know if she approved. I'm not sure she ever did feel that I'd finished anything. But then, neither do I believe that I finished anything." The great French poet and critic Paul Valéry said, "A work of art is never finished, only abandoned." And I think that's true.
There's an idea, though, that I think of you going back and bringing these various characters from previous work into the Singularities. I guess I was thinking that you have to have some reverence for them to want to bring them back and to be able to work with them again. But in what you just said, I guess, do you feel that they were abandoned in some way?
Oh, well, reverence is a nice word, but I don't think it applies. Somebody once asked my friend Richard Ford, about living with his characters, and he said, "I don't live with my characters. When the book was finished, I let go of the strings and I put the puppets back in their box, and put it away in the attic, and that's true. Characters, and they're made of words. They're like the creatures in our dreams, they're all versions of oneself. But I'm more interested in the characters in my crime books than in these other kinds of books, how I would describe them. Characters in my crime books I quite like, because in order to write a crime book, you have to be interested in the plot, you have to be interested in dialogue, you have to be interested in motivation and all that stuff. And that's craft work. Remember my former agent, now departed, he said to me one day, you write these crime books very quickly. How come it takes you so long to write good ones? I said, well, the crime books are craft, but the other ones are poetry. And he said, oh. And I told him that my friend, great Irish novelist John McGarn, always made a nice distinction. He said, there's prose and there's verse and then there's poetry. And poetry can happen in either medium. And he's right. Poetry is it's not to do with unjustified right-hand margins, and it's not to do with love and dove and all that. And I tell you, by the way, it just occurs to me, when Joseph Brodsky came to the West and was starting to write in English, he said to his friend James Heaney one day, he said, the English language is so poor in rhymes. And James said, well, what do you want? He said, well, Brodsky said, for instance, give me a really good rhyme for love. And the Seamus said, shove? Which is a very good rhyme for love. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make a summing up. The book begins by talking about a man coming to the end of his sentence. And it ends with the words full stop. That seems to me a good way to bow out. I wanted to revisit the books. I mean, I can't read them. So probably the facts are probably all wrong in Singularities. Because I cannot bear to read my own work. So I had to rely on increasingly faulty memory. But I wanted to bring them together. I wanted to bring my little flock of circus performers together. One of my early titles for the book was A Circus Animal's Desertion. The great poem by Yeats. I'm 76. I'm coming to the end of my writing life. The only thing I have absolutely in common with Henry James, I have chronic writer's cramp now in my right hand. But since I'm ambidextrous, I'm practicing my left hand. But I'm coming to the end, and I wanted to sum up, and I wanted to sum up as well as I could, and as delightfully as I could, and as beautifully as I could, and as tragically as I could. I mean, there's tragedy in the book. I dislike all my books. I like the crime ones. I don't like the big ones. But this one seems to me to be probably as near as I could get to what I wanted to do, which is still a long way off. Still a long way off. It's as near as I would get to what I wanted to do.
I think of that, of where that, and you talked about what the connection of the novelist and the connection with the novel between the reader. And as I was reading this novel, and there is such beauty in it that you can pour over a page and just bask in the glory of it. How do you respond to that? I mean, is that something that you like to think of a reader doing?
Oh yes, of course. As I say, I hope to again, I've only used the word, but I want to like the reader. I want the reader to read a sentence from a paragraph and say, that was beautiful. I'd read it again. I mean, it's always fascinating to me that people think they can buy a novel and read it. And that's it. They would never think of doing that with a symphony or a poem or a picture. For our novelists, we have to be content with one, at most two readings. I would like to think that somebody having finished the Singularities will say, I have no idea what that was about. I better start again, and find more delights, more pleasures along the way. I mean, that's how I read myself. I read books by other people, and I read them for the beauty of the construction, the beauty of sentences, the wielding of words. And I've said many times, the sentence is our greatest invention as a species. I've pointed out a few times that there have been civilizations, great civilizations, that didn't have the wheel. It was the Incas or the Aztecs, who knows. But they had to have the sentence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been a civilization. And what a privilege it is for me to have spent my life working with this basic and precious invention of humankind. I've been immensely lucky.
Do you consider this as a true statement that everyone in this world of this novel seems to be connected with everyone else, though they may not always be aware of it?
Well, yes, and I think that's the case. But, you're speaking from America to a person in Ireland. And in Ireland, we have 4 or 5 million people. And in Dublin, Dublin is a village. Everybody knows everybody else. But, I'll tell you, I'm very quick about it. I'll tell you the greatest coincidence I've ever known. I was in Zurich years ago giving a talk at the James Joyce Centre, which is run by a man called Fritz Zehn. And on the morning that I was leaving, the morning after I gave the talk, he gave me a Xerox copy of a poem by Theodore de Bonville, the French poet, who's obviously a distant cousin of mine. And in the poem, the line occurs, Les lauriers sont coupés. Les lauriers sont coupés is the title of a novel by Dujardin that James Joyce said he got the idea of streaming consciousness from. So he said, not a nice series of coincidences. I flew back to Dublin at lunchtime. I was crossing the street where I live. A friend of mine I hadn't seen for 5 years passing by. His car slowed down, rolled down the window, said, I've been reading the Goncourt journals. They keep talking about Theodore de Bonville, and I keep thinking of you. I thought, well, I crossed the road. A woman tapped me on the shoulder and said, my friend Fritz Zehn tells me you gave a wonderful talk in Zurich last evening. Now, here's the punchline to that story. About 3 months later, I was at a private dinner in Barcelona. There were 10 people at table. 4 of them were statisticians. And I told them this story about this coincidence, and they all shook their heads solemnly and said, there's no such thing as coincidence. And I said, well, no, but, it was pretty strange. And they said, oh, it happens all the time, you just don't notice it. And perhaps that's true. But I do think that the world is an interconnected place. I was walking through, well, no, there's no point in telling any more coincidences. But, we all know that the whole thing is connected. Also, we forget that we move in very small circles. I have a very small circle of friends here in Dublin. I know people around the world. I suppose I know about, 1,000 people? That's a very small number of people. And there are bound to be coincidences and concurrences in such a small number of people. But the world is a very strange place. A lot of this book is, it's called science, but I am fascinated by quantum theory. Quantum scientist and writer Carol Ravelli is a friend of mine. We were talking recently, we were doing a Zoom call, and we were talking about entanglement. I don't know if your listeners know what entanglement is in quantum theory. It's that if you have 2 particles and they're joined, one is red and one is blue, you separate them, and you take the red one to the other side of the universe, and you change its color. Instantaneously, the particle that stayed on the other side will change its color. Instantaneously. This is an impossibility. This cannot happen, yet it happens. And entanglement is used in making of mobile phones, and laptop, and all the rest of this new technology. So the quantum world is there. We bob along on the surface of it. And nobody understands quantum theory. Richard Feynman used to say, if somebody tells you he understands quantum theory, you're lying, because nobody does. And Feynman was one of the great quantum scientists ever. So we live in a very, very strange universe. And, on a much simpler level, a dog can detect one molecule of smell. It has a sensor at the top of its snout, can detect one molecule of the smell. Absolutely extraordinary. And they can see in the dark. Cats and dogs can see in the dark. And we're living with these creatures with tails who can see in the dark while we're blind. It's a very, very strange place. It's only because we grow up, we grow out in childhood, and the adults tell us, well, this is the world, this is just as it is. And we say, oh, all right, so this is the world, this is as it is. But every now and then we look around. Well, I can't speak for other people. Every now and then I look around and I think, this is the strangest place. You're standing under a blue sky, and suddenly all this canyon smoke sweeps up from the horizon. Clouds, You think, how can this be? And you're looking up to the sky and you're looking into infinity. If all that murk were cleared away, you see into infinity. It's very, very strange. And we're walking around on the earth, each of us thinking we're the center of the universe, falling in love, falling out of love, being kind to each other, cheating each other, making peace, going to war. It's a very, very strange situation. And then we die. I mean, I was writing a little memorial piece about my friend John le Carre just after he died. And I said, I found myself writing, death is stranger than life, which is saying something. And, it's true in a way, because we didn't have to get born, but we do have to die. That's a very strange predicament. I mean, to think that there were all those eons of time when one wasn't here, and then one is here for less than the blinking of an eye, and then one is gone again. Very, very strange. I mean, who would not try to explain or account for this mystery to himself or herself? That's a long way around saying what I've already said, that I do art in order to account for the strangeness of the world.
Again, John Banville's new novel is The Singularities. It is published by Knopf. We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us for next week.